was pretty cool. I mean, it wasn't my favorite of all of their meads, but it was excellent. It was excellently done, and I liked it. But they had a couple others that just kind of, for me at least, blew them out of the water.
Exactly. Yeah, I've got a cherry buckwheat going after I had judged what I thought was an excellent cherry buckwheat. It turned out it was Merrick's entry. I didn't know that until after the fact, but obviously the judging is blinded. But I was so impressed with that. I had never done it. I've done cherries and I've used buckwheat, but I never done a cherry buckwheat. And so we'll see how it turns out. But yeah, you can judge some great examples in competition, and it really inspires you to try to make something like that.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm still wanting to make an amazing strawberry mead for myself because I was so impressed with, well, originally the first strawberry mead I had that really blew me out of the water was one of Pete's recipes that was made by somebody else. And then Ricky Diaz did an amazing one that, almost got it. He was right on your tail, dude.
He was, and you don't know his backstory. He's a new mead maker. He's only been doing it for a couple of years.
I know.
I tried it. Yeah, I tried it. He did pretty well. I think I tried it at Domrus earlier, and he's a new mead maker. And several of us told him, if you can make mead this good so early in your mead making career, I mean, you've got so much future ahead of you. Mm-hmm. It was a really great strawberry.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah, and he's very much a perfectionist. I mean, he's called me several times, and we talk about what he's up to and things like that. And he's in the process of putting together a commercial venture for meadery, but he's just so focused on the little nitty-gritty details, and he's basically going up to all of the top mead makers and saying, "Teach me." He's not afraid to ask for input, for support, for information, whatever they're willing to give, and I think that's really amazing.
I agree.
So not a lot of people not everybody will do that. So
no, I know. Well, then they'll make their mead without kind of ignoring the process, and then it turns out not so good, and you maybe try to point out, how Facebook is, you try to point out maybe a few suggestions, and then they start arguing with you, and it's like, okay, well, just keep making it the same way then, if that's what you like.
Know that I won't be buying any of it, So, that's kind of the... And it saddens me when I see commercial mead makers who haven't availed themselves of what is not just a wealth of existing information, like, from AMMA, from Got Mead, from all the books that are out there, but also the willingness of so many top-flight commercial mead makers that are willing to share their knowledge on how to make a great mead. I mean, why would you not take advantage of that? I don't know. I just don't get that. I really don't.
I know, and I try not to take it personally when I taste a terrible commercial mead, but it does make me a bit upset. It's like you're selling this, and mead, a lot of people haven't had it before, and so they're curious, and they might buy it once or taste it once to see what it's about. And if it's not well made, they might be turned off and say, mead's not for me. And so then, whether you're a home brewer wanting to share it or you're a commercial wanting to sell it, they might say, I'll pass on that. I've had mead once. I didn't like it. It's not for me. And they maybe just didn't have a very well-made example. And, I know some folks might get into it and start selling it because they may think, well, making mead is easy. Just mix honey and water and put yeast in there, and we've got alcohol. And it's like, yeah, it's not quite that simple.
It's a little harder than that, yeah.
A little bit.
That will make you mead, but making good mead is a little bit more involved.
Well, it's like any skill. Practice makes perfect. I mean, the more you do it, the better you'll get. And if you take the time to use the resources that are available, and there are a lot of resources available to us.
There are.
There really are. I mean, there's a ton. There are so many people, professional and home, that are willing to share, and all over social media, willing to share. There's collected works digitally and physically, and so much. I mean, it's just there's no excuse at all for making bad mead. There really isn't.
No. Although I'll admit I've made my share of pretty terrible mead over the years. I didn't know any better. And
my first
batch I made, I've been brewing beer and cider and wine and mead for at least 25 years. And I started out as a malt extract brewer like everybody, and even before I had moved on to all grain, I thought, well, I'll just make a batch of mead. It's so easy. Well, you mix honey and water, right? And I didn't know anything about nutrient additions, and there was no internet. I got it from a book, and so it was so terrible. It was undrinkable, and there was an acid addition and tannin addition. Well, that would have made sense if it had some residual sweetness, but it was bone dry, and I added the acid and the tannin, not based on taste, which made it even more horrible. And it was so awful. I thought, I'm a beekeeper. The bees worked really hard to make this honey, and I totally
and here
totally
you are wasting it.
So,
oh my God!
Yeah, wasting it. I thought it perfectly waste after the bees made something that is almost perfect, and here I am just screwed it up, And so I actually did not make mead for a while after that. Until I learned more about fermentation, and then I came back to it.
Well, and that's the thing is that practice. It's the same thing. Practice makes perfect. I mean, Bob just pointed out on the live chat that everybody's made a clunker. Yeah, and a lot of people make several because you'll have temperature variations that you didn't count on, or you didn't realize this yeast doesn't like it to be, above a certain temperature, or you don't realize that it's not happy with, with dark fruits, or, that the water you're using added a flavor you weren't counting on, or there's so many variables involved that can go to making a crap mead, and it's just a matter of just messing with it until you hit on something that works and that you can reproduce, and then it's a matter of fine-tuning your skill set and your techniques, and and this is, I think, the most important thing, being willing to accept constructive criticism gracefully and get out there and make the changes necessary to correct the things that aren't working, And
I always recommend to my friends who want to make mead or beer, send their, and want to make it better. I say send it into a competition, especially one that's, where there's going to be certified judges, because it's worth the entry fee, the money that you pay to get that objective feedback. Yeah, and sometimes you get weird things on, because I don't know the whole backstory, and so you don't want to take, if it doesn't make sense, or if you entered it in more than one competition, you got different comments. Well, that's fine, but there's a lot of information in those judging sheets that can be so helpful, because sometimes, there's things that might not be quite right, but you just can't you don't know how it happened or what to do about it. And I love winning medals, don't get me wrong, but I found the more useful information are the ones that were kind of good but not quite there. And then I took it to heart, and then I just changed my process or what I did, and my meads got a lot better.
Yeah, that's it. I'm continually learning. There's so much. I look at, you're a better mead maker than I am. I haven't been practicing. I haven't been fine-tuning things and taking advantage of some of the new toys that have come out and the new tools and techniques, because I haven't been making that much mead, And so, it's fun to watch people that, I've been making mead for 25 years now, and, I think I'm pretty good at it, but, I've tasted meads that have come across my judging table that are far better than anything I've ever made. And that's because they're doing it well. They're taking advantage of the resources available to them to do it well.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'd be willing to bet that Carvin was saying the same thing, constantly fine-tuning, trying new things, finding out what works and what doesn't, and figuring out what's the best tools that are going to work for you.
Exactly. One of the other things, too, I've learned is, when I was first brewing in my early years, I would make something and I would sort of let everything happen, and then at the end when it was done, then I would taste it and I either liked it or maybe I didn't like it, and then if I didn't like it, I'm like, I didn't really know how to have prevented it or even what even happened. But now it every batch, even if I'm making the same recipe more than once, it's slightly different, and sometimes you can pick up things, that, I smell a little bit of sulfite. I better rack this off fast to get that out of there so I won't have to worry about it later. And things you learn over time. But, if that happened in my early days, I would have just let it happen, and it was just a rotten egg. It was just almost ruined, and there was not anything you could do about it. But, I found that the more you do, the more you're able to maybe detect things as it's happening, and then take some precaution. Oh, maybe there's it needs another nutrient addition. Maybe it's stuck. Maybe there's something else going on. That in my early days, I didn't know I just sort of follow the recipe. And that's why when someone asks me, what's your recipe? And I understand you're starting out, you want a foundation to learn from, but, it's like I give you my recipe, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to do what I did with it, because it's the process and the person actually using that process. I kind of use the analogy if somebody asked a famous painter, what pigments did he use and what brushes did he use, which is a fair enough question, but simply knowing that, it doesn't mean that you'd be able to be a Picasso automatically just because you use the same paint and the same brush. And it's the same thing with mead. It's a science, but it's also an art, and I think that's what I love about it, because there is science, and you do need to know microbiology, and you need to know chemistry, and you need to know the process. But then, when it comes to what ends up in the glass, that's going to be the art. I do a lot of blending, a lot of tasting trials, and that's the fun part, obviously, is the tasting trials and the blending. And it's better to do those early in the evening rather than late, when you won't really remember.
Well, you can still read your notes, you mean?
Yeah.
Exactly, or that you can still write notes.
I think that's what she meant, though, is that so that the next day when you look at him, you go, what the hell?
I think it was good. So, yeah, I come from a family of beekeepers and winemakers, and I remember when I was really little, my grandfather would come visit from Europe. My father's family was from Hungary.
Oh, okay.
And in Eastern Europe, Tokaj and all of that, oh my goodness, I didn't learn about Tokaj until I was a young man, but he would always make wine, and it was always in our basement. And he wasn't doing nutrient additions. I didn't even know what kind of yeast he used. I was so little then, but I still remember there was cheesecloth stuck in the carboy and all these fruit flies crawling on it. And now I think back, I'm like, oh my gosh, that probably was so acidic, that wine, but who knows? But so in my family were also beekeepers, and so I remember sitting as a kid in front of my dad's beehives and watching the bees go in and out, and the pollen forgers coming back with the little pellets of pollen in their legs, and just in awe of what they were doing. And I finally got my first hives given to me when I was 13 years old. And as I went through high school, a lot of other kids were maybe working in a fast food restaurant, and to make money, I was out with the beehives and harvesting honey and selling the honey and making it that way. And back then in the 1980s, that was kind of weird, to be a beekeeper as a kid. But
yeah, it would have been a great
now it's kind of cool.
I was a fruit
now
picker,
people are like, oh, that's great.
Yeah, now it's trendy and cool. Then it was.
It is. It's like I was 30 years ahead of my time or something. Exactly.
Well, you just had family with old-fashioned values. I think that's part of it.
Yeah. We had a big garden, and we had all the, cattle and chickens and all of that kind of stuff, and we still do now. My wife Jeannie and I, we live on a farm in South Dakota, and we've had all kinds of creatures on there, and we have a bunch of chickens and ducks and everything, and it's just what we do. I mean, it's not like we're trying to, we're not like survivalists or anything. It's just what you do. You live in the country, and you have a big garden, and and that's what you do.
We had
Eddie.
We had my grandfather had cows, and when I was very young, pigs and chickens, and we used to go out egg hunting, and because the chickens lay eggs in all kind of weird places, and and fresh butter. And my dad used to talk about milk right from the cow, which for some reason at the time didn't appeal to me, although now I really like it. And and just I grew up with that big truck garden. And we used to, my dad had a huge garden. We had a grape arbor that was 50 feet long, and my brother and I would sit underneath there and eat grapes, and we'd harvest enough.
Oh yeah.
It was a Concord arbor, and we used to harvest enough grapes off that we had to kind of do like you do with zucchini and like sneak up to neighbors and leave them on their doorstep, knock on the door and run away. But my dad had watermelon. We crack those little round ones. I forget the varietal that he was using, but it was the little round ones that are about the size of a soccer ball, and we would crack those open on fence posts and just sit right there in the garden and eat them. And he had like 100 feet of raspberry and blackberry bushes. just amazing. And there was wild blackberry bushes in the woods, and just food everywhere. I didn't think of it at the time, but it was like we had all these riches of food, and we ate out of that garden all year long. There was all sorts of veggies and fruit and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, just even going out into the orchard and pulling a fresh pea